Hey there, all you creepers and reapers. Welcome to another episode of the Femme Fatalities. My name is Anna, and I am here with...
Hey, Grieflings and Frightlings, it's Margaret, and welcome to another episode. And today we're discussing a polarizing film that has audiences divided. Anna, what are we talking about?
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to do it if I'm in danger. That's right. Blink twice. So
Yes.
there's a reason that the movie itself has a trigger warning before you start watching it. Margaret, do you think we should say what triggers it doesn't have? That might be a shorter list, or should we go through, I guess, the list?
Ooh. This is one of those films. There is SA, not Last House on the Left, not Martyrs, not I Spit on Your Grave style. I'm going to say SA because this movie really does demonstrate misogyny, toxic masculinity, and the plight of women, especially BIPOC women, and what they have to go through. What do you think, Anna?
Animal cruelty as well, illicit drug use,
Drugging it
yeah,
with the intention to do horrible harm. Like, so if you have that trigger or that's happened to you, do not watch this film. This film, men are purposely drugging women so they
yeah,
can violently
yeah.
attack them.
For lack of a better expression, this film is gonna fuck you up. Like, it is. So, trigger warning, like, I described the entire film to one of my friends who hadn't seen it yet as a trauma dump. Um, I think that there's a lot of animal cruelty. I think that the drug usage, the lack of intervention by people, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Isolation, entrapment, baiting and abetting, kidnapping, difficulty communicating, difficulty orating, making excuses for perpetrators. All of that is in the film.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Gaslighting, like this is, and I think Anna and I are probably going to vary on this one. I feel that Zoe Kravitz really tried to craft a movie post, oh my God, that super creeper Epstein, like
Yeah.
post Epstein world to really showcase the female experience. It starts off when our main character is at work and her white male boss says, smile. And that is, as women, so often we
Yeah.
have to smile. We see it at the dinner, right? When our main protagonist, and I think her name is Sarah,
Oh,
they
Frida, I think.
Frida, that's her best
Yeah.
friend. I'm talking about after Frida dies.
Oh, no, Jess is the friend that, right? I think. I think it's Frida, because I was like the artist.
Frida's the protagonist, and then
Yeah.
Sarah, they're the ones that remember drink the snake venom, and they remember, and they give
Oh,
it
yeah,
to the other
that's
two
right.
girls,
That's right.
and they're at dinner,
Yeah.
and they're trying to act like they don't remember, so they're smiling, and I thought
Yeah.
that is, like, how many women have had that
Mhm.
experience where they just had to smile even though they were so mad and they couldn't show their emotions, so they just had to be like, oh yeah, life's great, oh yeah, my food is awesome, oh yeah, and you can see them as they're starting to, like, crack under that
Mhm.
pressure of being with these horrific men.
Yeah. Well, and I think so something for me that really um was like wow was the fact that like everything was picked out for them, their outfits and the dresses specifically had the scarf so they could be hogtied. And anyone who's from a rural area knows that hog tying renders typically the animal completely
Mm-hmm.
powerless. Um, and I know that's a really strange thing to mention, but the idea of rendering someone or something completely powerless, not super great.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, the indigenous persons living on the island that are capturing all these snakes, like the old woman wants to help. Like she's recognizes Frida, which we'll get to eventually, and she wants to help, but she can't communicate effectively because there's a language barrier.
Yes. And that Frida doesn't understand, and she's
Mhm.
kind of creeped out, just being like, there's this woman capturing poisonous
Mhm.
snakes, and she just keeps yelling at me,
Mhm.
Red Rabbit, which you learn later in the movie why she keeps saying that to
Mhm.
Frida. And you also touch on the sadistic nature of the men. And
Yeah.
before Anna saw the movie, she asked about one of the actors that she really likes.
Yeah.
So I really found him to be one of the more repulsive of the men because he kept right, oh babe, babe,
Mhm.
babe, to
Yeah.
Sarah, and she's not his
Yeah.
girlfriend. And
Mhm.
then when you see what he does to her at night, you're like, you want her to be your girlfriend. And I took that as like subconsciously, like
Mhm.
when our subconscious just says there's somebody's vibes are off. And so she's
Mhm.
like, I'm not your girlfriend. Stop calling me babe. And he's like, babe, babe. And then it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that like power dynamic, and that she
Mhm.
knows that there's something off with
Yeah.
him.
Well, and the irony is, so we're talking about Simon Rex's character. Um, he was also in the rap game for a while. His name was Dirt Nasty. And one of his songs is like my body confidence anthem. So, and I've met him, and he's quite a delightful human being in person. So, and sometimes it's easy to confuse the role a person plays with who they
Mhm.
are. Um, but yeah, he sings a song. It's called Healthy, and um, I mean, it is a little bit vulgar, but I like it. It's like one of my get ready songs. So for me to be like, oh man, this song is like so empowering for me, and then to see him portray someone who is just totally the opposite of that was kind of enjoyable because it shows his range. Um, but yeah, that's it was like, whoa, okay. I
Mhm.
think like Channing Tatum's character, Slater King, we never find out what he apologized for on social media, right? So my whole thing when I'm watching this film, I'm like, where are Frida and Jess's other friends? Like, where are people who are like, he just did something terrible. Why would you go somewhere with him? Why are you hanging out with him? Like, let's slap you into reality, my friend. Um, Also, there's no concept of time or anything because I know if I was whisked away to some island, I'd be like, oh God, I got bills to pay. I got to be to work. So I think it's really showing how people get wrapped up in love bombing and they can't see
Mhm.
anything else beyond that. And the drug usage PSA, if you're listening and you use drugs, like more power to you as long as you are using in amounts that are not going to be detrimental to you and you are using with people you trust because that
Mhm.
is very important. And this film really kind of teaches us why. And
Yeah.
yeah,
And that like insidiousness, right? Because they're using, but they're also using the men use the perfume
yeah,
as the means to get the women to be compliant, to
mhm,
lose sense of time and reality and all that. And then the drug use just adds to that.
mhm,
And remember like the scene where they're all running and laughing, and then one of
yeah,
them's like, why are we running? And then
uh-huh,
later in the film you see them like running and screaming. It's like, so something intuitively, it felt like
mhm,
they were unsafe and they
yeah,
were just too drugged up. And like Anna says, like, use wisely because these men are doing this. And I also think you touch on something huge that the movie does too, how celebrity, even when they do heinous acts,
yeah,
depending on their celebrity, people will still cheer for them. They will
mhm,
still root for them. They will still be like, oh my gosh, I get to meet so and so. And it feels like in
mhm,
cancel culture, right now people are really struggling with what is the divide between what somebody does in their personal life.
Mm-hmm.
When do we cancel them? And when is it, okay, you did some bad stuff, you're still a great actor.
Right.
And I agree that's like a really blurry line, and we don't know what
Mm-hmm.
Slater King did. I just assumed it was something along the lines of like him sexually assaulting somebody.
Yeah.
And because of his celebrity, they often say, oh no. And oftentimes, again, it's the woman that gets
Mm-hmm.
blamed. And sadly, the media and publicists for the celebrity will go to all lengths just to, she could be a kindergarten or school teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and they could be like, oh no, here we have a picture of her in like a Halloween costume, like maybe she's super sexy. I mean, like, nope, see, she
Yeah.
used to be a street worker, and she doesn't have the means to be like, no,
Mm-hmm.
I was not a sex worker. So
Right. Absolutely. And I do think that there is, this huge gender bias in the film. So towards the end, when the women start remembering, and the young kid that's like the protege, he has a blackened eye. So my immediate thought was, oh my God, they're drugging him too. And one of the guys assaulted him, right? So I would have preferred that than him just being someone who was complacent, because when you're complacent,
mhm.
it makes you complicit. It
Yes,
really
and
does.
that was like sad. Like I thought that too. I'm like, oh no, he's just complacent, which makes
Mhm.
it like he's not doing anything
Yeah.
to help these women. He's just
Mhm.
there for what he thinks is a good time, because he's another one that's all struck. Like Slater can
Mhm.
do no wrong, so that
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is the whole abusive relationship that we see between Slater and Frida. Because to me, that's really what it resembled. She'd been here before, didn't remember anything. So obviously, he love bombed her before,
mm-hmm,
swept her away, and then turned out to be this monster, right? She gets returned home, and the same thing happens again, right? So then we get into breaking the cycle, right? How often do we
mm-hmm,
see a person who has a history of abusive relationships and finds themselves in another and another and another? And the difficulty associated with breaking that cycle, removing themselves from that blame, that lack of self worth, the no self esteem, just all of the things that are so difficult to do. And I think that their relationship shows that. And I think the fact that, Slater is like, I care about you, you're special. In his mind, I think he believes this. I think that clearly the train is at the station, but the tracks are on the other side of the road with him. And when I say that, I heard this metaphor a long time ago talking about specific cognitive illness and cognitive disease where you're at the train station, the tracks don't line up, or the tracks are misplaced, right? So that's what's happening internally to this person's thought process, or how their brain is wired, essentially. And this is very controversial. I don't know what to think, honestly, in my own opinion. But some people think that abusers, they're just broken in their brain, right? And others think that there's some sort of causation. Something had to happen to you along the way in your life to encourage you to behave in this manner. And through therapy and support and services, you can be rehabilitated. Um, I don't know if I feel more towards one way or the other at this point in my research. It's very much a struggle for me. Um, I mean, statistically, we can say, what is it? 1 in 3 women have been in some sort of traumatic situation. So realistically, you either know someone or you are that person, or a combination of the two. And in this day and age, especially, I would say being a Gen Xer or being a millennial, I think that's a fair assessment. What do you think, Margaret?
Yes. I agree with you, and I really feel like it's so nuanced. Like we don't know, there's still like it's still being researched, like what
Mhm.
makes people hurt other people, especially now with epigenetics coming into the picture. We now know that something that happens to my grandma
Mhm.
impacts me. And so then we still don't know the extent of trauma. We do know in Blink Twice that Slater has had trauma because he keeps
Mhm.
talking about he just wants to forget. He wants to
Yeah.
forget. He wants to forget. You need to forget because when you forget,
Mhm.
your life can be better. Really not, because then
No.
he becomes a perpetrator. So he was perpetrated on,
Mhm.
and then in forgetting being perpetrated on, other than he knows he was perpetrated on, he becomes a perpetrator. And so I feel like the movie's touching on
Yeah.
that cycle of abuse and what happens to people when they've been abused. And I feel like
Mhm.
that can be like a misconception. Not all abused people become abusers.
Mhm.
Most of them don't. Does their trauma manifest? Does it manifest in unhealthy ways? Can it be toxic at times? Yes, because with trauma, we're living in a heightened state or a hypo aroused state. So the world is just different. So
Mhm.
it's really interesting when we try to see like what is going on, because we could see with Slater, which I feel like kind of humanizes him. We know that this is part of his trauma cycle. Christian Slater, we don't know. He just seemed like a narcissist to
Yeah.
me. Simon Rex seemed like somebody desperate to be loved and used
Mhm.
this as an option. We've got the guy that's complacent. And
Yeah.
then we've got
Haley
Haley
Joel
Joel,
of
who
all
he just
people.
gave ew vibes, like
Mhm.
creeper vibes, like the kind of person that if he got on the bus and sat next to you, you would move because he
Mhm.
just
He
so.
had that gross creep. Yeah, like you said, the creeper vibe.
Mhm.
And he also mentions his ex-fiance or whatever. So obviously he is projecting all of his rage towards her on one of the girls. Like whoever he
Mhm.
chooses for that evening.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, so it's a trauma-ridden
Mm-hmm.
movie that's really looking at how in relationship, how our trauma cycles manifest
Yeah.
in some very toxic,
Mm-hmm.
unhealthy ways. And I even think of the movie really touches on female rage, which
Mm-hmm.
I personally loved, like Frida, Sarah, like getting angry. Like I was like, hell yeah, I like this
Mm-hmm.
turn, which leads to the end. What did you think of the end? Because that was another thing that polarized people. We didn't get the happy. So viewers, listeners, stop now if you haven't seen it, unless you want to know. We didn't get the typical Hollywood ending
Mm-hmm.
that I feel like a lot of people were rooting for. They wanted her to kill him.
Yeah. So for me, I we all know I'm a big fan of Kubler-Ross, and I did notice that they went straight into anger. No denial after that snake venom. Um, so I would have rather the group of women all taken the venom, worked together and outsmarted the men and got out of there and really worked to expose them and fix things on a much larger scale. That would have been my ending that I would have chosen.
Ooh.
I think when we talk about trauma dumping and passing trauma on to people, Frida is traumatizing Slater, in my opinion. At the end, she's passing it right back to him, right? So yeah, it's a great happy ending. She owns the company now, she's got all this money, she's torturing him presumably for the rest of their lives together, but she's fallen into the same trap that society lays for us and the patriarchy sets up for us, that if you have money, if you run your own business, if you're traveling abroad, if you're going to galas, if you're dressed a certain way, if you marry the right person, then your life is good. And I found it very distressing. I was not happy at all. And I'll tell you, the next day I went into work and I was not acting like myself, probably for the first couple of hours, because it really disturbed me. And I think at the end of the day, the cruel joke is Zoe Kravitz trauma dumped on all of us. And that's
Ooh.
exactly how I feel. And that's fine. That's my opinion. The thing that upsets me is I know I'm not the only person that had this reaction. I know that a lot of people who saw this film were very triggered. What is being done now to help viewers? That's what I want to know. Because at the end of the day, that is a film. That's fiction, but it's based very strongly in reality. And I want to know if someone falls back into their trauma journey or their mental health journey, where are you advertising supports and services to help them? That's what I want to know. Because as an artist, as a director, as a writer, you owe that to the people that are appreciating your art. And I know I'm getting very passionate about that, but that's just how I feel.
Ooh, yes. Thank you for sharing. I have a completely different stance, and I'm wondering, right? Because you're like, she trauma dumped. What about Last House on the Left? Martyrs, I Spit on Your Grave. I find those films that much more traumatizing. I feel that this movie, Zoe Kravitz said, this is the female experience. This is what women go through every day. And I took the end as empowerment of her saying, this BIPOC woman gets to take back her power, her voice. She doesn't get exposure. Like, if we look at like socioeconomics and all of this, who's at the top of the food chain? White men. So I saw it as free to say, no, I'm changing the world. I'm going to start to switch things around, because even Frida and Sarah, right, they had that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
We can't report them. Nobody's going to believe this. What do we do when we leave here? Because nobody will believe us. And that's part of the female experience. So we both had two very different experiences of the ending, where I thought, hell yeah, take back your power, claim your seat at the table. Because if we look at all of the intersectionality, Frida is the last person in our society that's going to have a seat at the table. So she's like, no, I have an opportunity. I'm going to change this trauma to where my children, if she has children, get seats at the table, where the Slater Kings don't get to run the world.
Yeah.
That we have strong women.
Well, and I think for me, I don't want to sit at any of those tables.
Mm-hmm.
So why, like, I don't want Frida at one of those tables, because at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of pretentious rich people that we're seeing that have no concept of the reality that like us regular Joes, Janes, and Jessies live. So why would you want to sit at that table? Why would you want to degrade another human being? You're supposed to make yourself better. You're supposed to work through your own trauma. And for me, they could have outsmarted him, like, meaning the group of women. They could have gotten him to sign a big ass whopping check to start a nonprofit to help victims of trauma, right? So for me, it was just like, the end, they could have been at a gala for this nonprofit that they started, seeing all sorts of different faces and people and, you know, characters that are affected by horrific things in their life. And for me too, the gender binary, it makes it seem like this is women versus men, and it's not about that. You know, we've talked about this on other casts, like the Promising Young Women. Male perpetrators are often forced by other males to commit acts. We see that in the movie. Men are also abused when they're young boys. People that are in the LGBTQ plus community experience trauma and abuse. So I understand and see what the film was trying to do, but I think it just segued into the stereotypes of what's going on. And let's face it, against all socioeconomic, political-economic, world classes, caste, perspectives, this stuff is going on. It's not just some rich dude grabbing like a working gal and taking advantage of her, even though that is vile and disgusting and horrible. That's not how it always happens. And so for me, it's more of, you want to give victims a voice, give victims a voice. And that I know I'm getting myself very worked up about this, but I feel so strongly and passionately about that. And at the end of the day, if you're listening to this, if you have been through trauma, something's going on now, something has happened to you previously in your life, you do have a voice. You deserve to be heard. You deserve someone to bear witness to your trauma, and you deserve to work through it in a healthy, support ridden way through services that are available to you that work for you. And don't forget that. We're talking about a movie. This is a movie. You're living your own reality, and you deserve to have a happy life.
Agreed. Thank you so much for sharing. It is you. Yeah, this has got you worked up because it's heavy. It's a big topic. And I see the end as that fight, right? That so is working with trauma. Oftentimes we're working with the parts that wanted to fight, the parts that wanted to freeze, the parts that wanted to run. So I see this ending as Frida's fighter part, really just saying, no, I'm going to conquer all my trauma, which happens in a therapeutic setting. That's part of the work. How are we working through? How is your trauma not dominating you? And this movie is talking about trauma that women experience every day. So yeah, it's going to be activating. It's going to get people going because this is still a very hot topic, as Anna said, as women continue to be abused by people in power, by people not in power, by people. Just it happens. This movie is maybe not exploiting, it's not explaining, it's showing that, it's trying to demonstrate this is part of what happens daily to people in our society.
Yeah, absolutely. And that for me is just, I think that's why it is so activating is, you know, someone who has experienced trauma, um, I try to deal with that in the most healthy way I can. But it is very activating for me, and that's okay. Like if you watch this movie or a movie like it and you react as I have, or if you react in a different way, like that's okay. But you have to also be able to rationalize why you're reacting, what your next actions and steps should be, and ensure that it's nothing involving self-harm or something that's detrimental to yourself or your support system, whether it be the people around you, your counselor, whatever it is that gives you support and contributes to a healthy life and your means of maintaining a positive lifestyle. That's really something that you have to consider as well.
Yes. So getting help, getting support so that your trauma does not define you.
Absolutely. Yeah, and part of it too is like I have become like the loudmouth friend, because I don't want to see the people in my life experience things that I've experienced or that other people in my life have experienced. And I felt very frustrated once again, like none of Frida and Jess's coworkers said anything. Like they didn't have any friends. The whole like taking of the cell phone also kind of restricted any communication. Um, it just, you would think someone would say or do something, but then again, how often have we been in a negative situation ourselves? And I'm not even talking about like an abusive relationship, anything where you're just making choices that maybe from other points of view are not the best for yourself. And then after the situation's over, you have like people close to you who are like, well, I thought something was up, but I didn't want to say anything because it's your life. And how do we communicate with people when we are concerned about their choices in a way that is not going to result in an explosive conversation, right? Because those are really hard talks to have.
Yeah, like how you exactly that as you're like, why didn't people ask anything? And then because people don't, they just say, oh, something's off, or I wonder why they haven't been to work in a week, and then don't ask these
Mm-hmm.
hard questions, and even the movie touches on that, right? That as women, that female conditioning that happens too. A group of 5 women trusted this group of men because they
Mhm.
assumed that each of the women already knew these men, and so they
Yeah.
assumed safety. Until then they learn, they're like, wait, no,
Mhm.
like, you don't know them, I thought you knew
Yeah.
them. And how often as women we will assume safety because we'll see another woman with
Mhm.
somebody, and that will make that person safe, and then either that person is unsafe, like in this movie, and even sometimes the woman can be unsafe too, because as
Mhm.
women, we're looking for that safety
Yeah.
and that sadness too. That, and I think Sarah's character really showed that, right? That she was kind of jealous at first. Like, she didn't like
Mhm.
Frida and Slater's relationship, and that conditioning as women that had
Mhm.
been happening. What's one way that you take a woman's power away? If you get her to fight with other women,
Yeah.
then it's like what's happening in society right now. If all these different groups of people fight with each other, then the people that have power continue
Mhm.
to have power because the groups of people aren't coming together.
Yeah. And there's, you if you're still listening, which I hope I didn't scare anyone away, but this is a really good example of, like, I got myself very upset during the conversation and worked up. Margaret and I are both women. She let me get it out, right? She's being supportive by letting me air my grievances. She's not saying, well, you don't feel the same way I do, that's wrong, or you should look at it from this side, because she could tell by how impassioned I became that this is something that to my core I feel very strongly about, right? And I'm not telling her you should feel this way. I'm just saying, like, yo, this is how I feel. This is why. And that's it. So it's really important to be able to listen to each other and hear each other out. No one is going to agree 100% of the time, but that doesn't mean you can't hear another person's opinion, try to understand it to the
Mhm.
best of your ability, and then still figure out how you can work together to achieve goals.
Yes, that was so well said. Thank you for sharing that, and that we get to model that for our viewers and listeners, and even Frida and Jess, right? We can see how at first Frida is being supportive
Mm-hmm.
of Jess, and then she's just so enamored with Slater that she's trying to convince Jess to stay,
Yeah.
which we often do. Come on, you're my girl, you
Mm-hmm.
got my back. And then we see how Frida changes when her and Sarah sit together and they are both starting to talk as they're coming out of it, and then being
Yeah.
able to be like, okay, you feel like something's wrong, like, let's explore this. Because
Mhm.
I think even Sarah was like, why do I have bruises
Yeah.
on my body? Why? Like, what? And that, I guess Jess's death was the catalyst for
Mhm.
Frida to start to be like, wait, Jess felt like something was wrong. She felt like something was
Yeah,
off.
absolutely. And that's, your body will tell you things. I mean, there are
Mhm.
physiological things that happen after you have experienced trauma and abuse. And I was kind of glad that that was included, because that is very factual. Even if your mind is not allowing you to fully grasp what's going on, your body is going to tell you. And
Oh,
how
yes.
often, like, are people, just as an example, in an abusive relationship and they're constantly getting sick? It's because of the stress that is having physical effects on the person in the relationship. And I do appreciate that, that was displayed in the film.
I agree. Like Anna said, our body will remember. It will give us tells. Like, even when I'm working with people, I will say, like, our body will say, I'll be like, I was fine. And then, like, right here, my body's
Mhm.
already telling you I wasn't fine. Like, something was happening in the situation that my body wanted to protect itself. When I work with sexual assault, and viewers, listeners, please, if you've had sexual assault, get yourself a therapist that specializes in that kind of trauma. I've asked, like, my women clients, how does your vagina feel? And at first they're kind of like, what?
Mhm.
If you've been, even if you're like, I don't remember, something feels off. And then I ask you, how does your vagina feel? For women that have been sexually assaulted, I get, she's angry. She hates me. She doesn't feel safe. Like, right there, the body is saying that something has happened. and women to like normalize this. Our vagina is very sensitive.
Mhm.
Even a pap smear. Like if I'm like, okay, I'll give consent, but I really don't want to, my
Mhm.
body could feel that that was a violation because my body has already told me. Oftentimes, as women, when we talk about sexual assault, like our legs will automatically, especially those
Mhm.
of us that have had it, will want to squeeze shut. Like our body will tighten. So these are like our body's
Yeah.
self-protective ways, and it can be heightened like
Mhm.
when we watch a movie. So I appreciate that Blink Twice really was trying to bring this awareness. I almost feel like it was kind of like wake up men. Like this is
Mhm.
what women are going through, and even if you think it's okay, hey babe, oh the fish is going to be so good. It's just giving you like fuck
Yeah.
you vibes. Like
Mhm. Then she's not.
what's going on?
Yeah.
Mhm.
When I say fuck you, that doesn't mean I want to fuck you, and there's a
Mhm.
big difference. Um,
Yes.
like, to put it bluntly. Um, and maybe that was the purpose. I mean, maybe the purpose of this film was to get a reaction and to tap into that female anger. Because, nobody gets things done like a feminine identifying person who's angry. I'm gonna tell you. Um, that is the truth. So if you are female identifying and you get angry, you're gonna get stuff done. That is a fact. So maybe that was part
Yes.
of the purpose too.
Yes, maybe this movie was saying female identifying people, how do we come
Hmm.
together and start pushing against the real harms in
Right.
society? Male identifying people, how do you support female
Hmm.
identifying people to push against the Epsteins, to push against the people
Yeah.
that are doing the harm? Because again,
Mhm.
if we're fighting amongst ourselves,
Yeah.
change isn't going to happen because the powers
Hmm.
that be are like, okay, yeah, you're infighting. So women are mad at men and men are mad
Hmm.
at women. So now we get to be here and be like, okay, whoa, I don't
Yeah.
want to be a male identifying person that hurts a female identifying
Hmm.
person. How do I change? And men, this isn't to slam you. You have been conditioned just as much
Hmm.
as women have been
Yeah.
conditioned into the social norms that it's the man here and the woman here. And so as a society, it's our job to change this so that
Hmm.
we're no longer upholding
Yeah.
these norms that have been worked into us.
Yeah. And also male identifying persons, if you have been accosted by another male identifying person or a female identifying person, how do we help you fit into this dynamic? How do we help you too, right? So we have to be mindful of that. Or female identifying persons who have been accosted by other female identifying persons.
Mhm.
This whole dynamic of all of these different sorts of incidents happening, at the end of the day, no one should have power over someone else's well-being.
Mhm. Yeah. Over their autonomy. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
what this movie is saying. How do we take that out of the equation so that and this is a very polarizing film. You listeners heard, witnessed Anna get activated.
Mm-hmm.
And there are theories like in the trauma field that say us as people, when we witness other people's trauma, it gives us more capacity to hold space for trauma. And then that's one way we heal collective trauma. That's one way we heal our own trauma. So, me witnessing Anna's activation, us witnessing the activation of the movie, movies provide us a safer space to
Mm-hmm.
build capacity because it's not watching the news where we hear about Epstein and then a lot of us just shut down because it's real, it's too much. Then we go to watch a movie and we get activated and we can work through that activation so that when we turn on the news, like Diddy right now, that we can be like, oh my gosh, I can sit with this instead of turning it off because us as a society. That's one way we help people with traumas. We don't say, oh my God, I can't deal with your trauma. We go,
Right.
and I might need like, hey, if Anna's like, Margaret, something happened to me. I might need a minute to tell her, hey, give me a minute. I want to
Mm-hmm.
be present for you. Or, hey, I've had a rough day. Can we talk tomorrow so that I can be present for her, or I can't be present for you. Who can we call together? Who can help us with this? Because as a society, we have this perverse draw towards trauma, but then yet we also like shame it and shun it. And I feel like this movie was like in your face, like trauma's not going anywhere. So work with it and not do this weird, like, I'm going to look at the car accident when I drive by, but as soon as I hear about Diddy, I'm going to have to turn off the TV.
Right.
That's not fair to all the people that had to live that experience.
Yeah. And I think part of it too that I want to mention is, you know, particularly as female identifying persons, right? You're given this idea of, well, nice girls do this, nice girls don't do that. So, okay, let's look at the characters in this movie. Nice girls work really hard so they can get ahead. Nice girls don't rock the boat too much. Nice girls don't use drugs with people they don't know. Heck, sometimes nice girls don't use drugs at all. Nice girls would never go anywhere with a guy that they just met. So you apply these to our heroines of the story, right? And that makes it even more complex, right? Because we're conditioned to say, well, oh, well, you know, society says they shouldn't have went somewhere with those guys. Society says they shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be doing that. And, you know, I would hope that people viewing this film don't have the reaction of, oh, well, it was bound to happen. They went with these guys in the first place. But the frightening thing is, to me, I know somewhere someone watching that did have that thought cross their mind.
And I love how you point out that society says not those men shouldn't have done that. Women should be safe to go someplace. That brings us back to like man versus bear and how polarizing that was when, again, society says, well, like Anna would say, what was she wearing? Well, she shouldn't have done this. We need to have a society where women can go with a strange man and not worry about being drugged or raped or harmed. That it's just part of society. And sadly, our society has a long way to come. And so then when movies like Blink Twice come out, people get upset because it's saying, here's society's trauma and I'm going to throw it in your face. And we don't like that. We like our trauma to come neatly wrapped, or I'm going to turn on the news so I know that I'm going to see something traumatic than when a movie. And I wonder if that was one of the things for you, Anna, as we trust creators, we go into movies with like this sense of safety. And Zoe Kravitz really was like, I'm like ripping that Band-Aid off. Like, this is not a safe movie. That's like one reason why I can't do Martyrs. I can't do I Spit on Your Grave, because I don't trust the filmmakers to be gentle with the trauma that those movies are really touching on. And you also touch on that line between when does a movie do too much to bring awareness and when does
it's
it do
just
not
the
enough?
Yeah, and I feel like for me, like, Kill Bill is one of my favorite films, right? And from the get-go, like, eventually, like, we essentially know that Beatrix Kiddo is a killer, right? So none of these things that she's doing to avenge what happened comes as a surprise, right? So for me, there wasn't anything preparatory other than knowing, like, Slater King was some rich douchebag. And I think with that, like, at one point Jess is like, oh, when are the human sacrifices? So it alludes to this. So I'm thinking, okay, you know, these guys are kind of creepy, but maybe they're sacrificing people to the snake god. Maybe that's why there are snakes everywhere. And the turn that it takes, thank goodness Margaret did kind of warn me, like, this is not what you think. So I had a little bit of an inkling. And then another really good friend of mine, he and I have been friends since, oh gosh, high school, I guess. He's known me for a long time, so he knows a lot of things about me. And so he kind of warned me too. And interestingly enough, he told me, he said, I don't think there's anything redeemable about the movie at all. And him being a cisgender male, after I saw the movie, it kind of really boggled my brain that he would say that, but he is a very kind person and a very caring person, and he cares about society, and he has a lot of women and female identifying people in his life that he cares very deeply for. So that made sense, but just I think our assumptions that society gives us is like the male reaction has to fall into this box, and it doesn't. You know, everyone's going to have their own individual reaction to the movie.
Yes. And then for you and your friend, it definitely was like, nope, this movie is not good. And I went with my partner, and he was with me. He felt that that was like female empowerment. Like that was a movie that was like, wake up, men, look at what's
Yeah.
happening to women. So, right, you listeners, viewers, you're going to go into this, and you probably will either be a like the spectrum, like closer to Anna, like I didn't like it, or me, where I was like, I love this. I feel like this is female empowerment. I feel like this is waking up. Anna and I, in our daily lives, we also walk two different walks, which makes this beautiful. I sit with trauma every day. So for me, I was like, fuck yeah, like let's beat trauma. Like let's wake up the world to the traumatic experiences. Let's normalize trauma. That's really hard when like people are not used to, like, Anna doesn't have the training that I have to sit in a 2-hour movie and watch about trauma. So that's really hard and traumatic.
Yeah, right. And I come from more of a perspective where I'm I'm in a professional setting every day where I need immediate results. It is high pressure, immediacy, go, go, go. You don't have time to sit with anything. Sometimes you barely have time to eat lunch at your desk. So it's just very different when you're surrounded by that immediacy consistently. And for me, I'm very like, everyone deserves a happy life. Let's encourage and help each other. And you're right, it is very hard to kind of sit through that film, which ironically, like I loved Promising Young Woman. But I think part of that, looking at the two films, was that Cassie made the ultimate sacrifice. She sacrificed herself, which also identified all of the perpetrators, and we find out that like there's legal intervention, there are all these other things that are going on, right? So for me, it's not just kind of flipping the tables, it's more the whole world finds out what you did and you will be punished, and everyone knows you're going to be punished. And I think I really wanted that kind of validation, not just for Frida, but for like all of the other women we meet in the film, all of the other women we assume this has happened to. And I just, I didn't get that. So it was just, it was disappointing. I think Promising Young Woman just set the bar really high for me.
Yes. And I appreciate that you bring it, right? Like Promising Young Woman, as women, delivers that satisfying ending that as women, we want the perpetrators to be punished, to be held accountable. Blink Twice takes a more harsh, realistic take where oftentimes perpetrators don't even make it to be prosecuted, where they aren't held accountable. Or we've seen time and time again in the Me Too movement where, oh, but he's a promising young man, which Promising Young Woman takes and says, we are going to flip this, where it feels like Blink Twice was that hopelessness, which Anna and I have talked on before. Hopelessness in movies can be really hard because we want that hope. Like in Promising Young Woman, and Blink Twice was kind of like, the reality is that if you're hurt by somebody, our justice system sucks. So good luck getting something. So yeah, I can see why that was really
Yeah.
hard.
And realistically,
Yeah.
too, speaking of the penal system, the justice system, it's not like it is on TV. Like if you and I love Law and Order. It's a great escape for me. It's one of my vices, but it's not like Law and Order at all. I mean, court cases can take years upon years upon years, and you can have multiple prosecutors, public, well, I call them public pretenders, um, public defenders, multiple attorneys. The other thing, too, and this is something that is very, very difficult because as humans, we feel emotion. The law and the court are concerned with the facts of the incident and the legalities involved.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it very difficult because you integrate human experience and human emotion into that. The court of public opinion is very different than what is written in your state's annotated code.
Yes. Yeah. It just brings back that heaviness of the film. And I really appreciate your vulnerability this episode and your willingness to share that vulnerability and be open about just how activating and hard this film was for you. So I really want to just acknowledge that you did that and that I appreciate that. And who did you most identify with, since this has been such a heavy episode?
Probably the little old lady. Because I really do want to help other people, but sometimes there are barriers that prohibit that from happening. So you got to get creative, and eventually figure out hopefully a way that does help people. But definitely her. How about you?
I was torn between like Jess, I mean like the like skeptical friend that's like, I don't know about this. And then I also related to Sarah in that when I touched on like as women, we've been conditioned to be jealous of other women, and I have been guilty of being someplace and then being jealous of another woman. And then when I come out of that and I get to know the other woman, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this woman is wonderful and fantastic, and I've got your back, and like, let's go, I'll be your ride or die. And so I really appreciate it. And I found that. I think
Yeah.
that's where I found hope in this film, was like women being able to be like, okay, society says well, we can't get along. I'm going to get to know you, and then I'm going to have this really strong female relationship with you.
Yeah. And speaking of Sarah, we never know what happens to her.
I know. Maybe she's on another Survivor episode, right? Because she's like, she comes from like the reality world.
Yeah. So it would have been nice to find out like what became of her too.
It would have been nice to see her sitting at the table, like at that gala,
yeah.
like with Frida and Slater, like if she was there eating too, like, hey, yep.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing too, which we totally didn't talk about, was Gina Davis's character. So she's Slater King's sister, right? I assume.
That's what I thought. Like that is what I gathered. Yeah.
And she has the venom, and then she's like, I don't want to remember. It's easier to forget. And she flies into this rage, right? And I think, how many times are we told, well, just don't think about it? It'll be easier if you don't think about it. And I think that she really illustrates that.
Or as women, again, listeners, viewers, this has been conditioned. This is like centuries. This is like generations that have happened to us. So it's going to take a lot. It's going to take work to get over this. I felt that she touched on how often, like when we turn on the news, there's the wife, the sister, the mother. Never my son. My son would never do that. My child wouldn't do that. And then often, I don't want to know. So like if there's an affair and the lover calls, I don't want to know. And this, like our inability to take the truth. And there's grief in there. If I find out something horrific about my partner, it's going to be devastating. I'm going to grieve that. And again, we don't make change if we don't do this hard work and say, God, this sucks. Like, I did not want to know that you were this killer, like Anna and I talked about in Trap. Like if you found out your partner is a serial killer, what do you do? We don't want to know this information. We like to live in our happy little bubble. I've got this great husband. Oh, Slater King, so great.
Yeah.
Then what do? We're like, okay, you're not great. And it touches on that. As humans, we all make mistakes. We're all fallible. We are all, some of us though, are almost evil. We are insidious.
Yeah.
There is this pleasure that we're getting out of hurting others. And that's a
Yeah.
really profound truth to find
Yeah.
out about somebody you care about, even if it's a celebrity. It doesn't have to be somebody in your life. We struggle with that because as humans, we often want to believe that everybody's good. And that internal struggle when we learn, oh, there are people that aren't good.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, and I don't want to put it this way, but you're either a sadist or you're a masochist. And unfortunately, I I think most people in this world are masochists in the sense of the fact that, I don't mean this in a sexual way at all, but we're seeking self-improvement, right? And sometimes negative things that happen to us, we believe we should be punished because we're not these superhuman great beings yet. Whereas those that fall more into the sadist category, they enjoy the suffering. They enjoy inflicting the suffering. And it's a really difficult thing to see. Yeah, do some of us weave in between those two scenarios? Absolutely. But I think at the end of the day, you're always going to be more one than the other.
I love that you touch on that. And when we look at like perpetrators, like in working with trauma, it's one thing when we have trauma and we're able to say, my perpetrator, they didn't know any better. This wasn't insidious. This wasn't intentional. Then when we sit with, my perpetrator was getting pleasure out of the harm,
Yeah.
that trauma hits different
Yes.
than for often like as children, if we have an abusive parent and we're like, okay, like this is part of generational trauma and my parent was not getting pleasure out of hurting me. Then when we sit and we go, oh, actually my parent used to smile and laugh, that it feels like it just cuts a little bit deeper, as like Anna's touching. And so then these are like hard things as us for humans to wrestle with. Who are we, like, and how do we feel safe in a world where there's sadists, there's masochists, there's people that are gonna intentionally harm people to feel good about themselves.
Absolutely. But to settle this on a pleasant note, there are people out there that truly are caring, that want to benefit themselves and benefit others by sharing knowledge and wisdom and experience and helping to support others. And I would just ask that if you are still here listening, please acknowledge and realize that there are people out there that do want to help. Please try to focus on them. The more good that we can spread, the better off we are. Outlooks are contagious. Make sure that yours is one that someone else wants to catch.
Yes, thank you, thank you. And just to piggyback on that, if you are starting therapy, you get to ask your therapist, what training do you have in trauma? How do you feel about trauma? These are my trauma symptoms. Can you work with me? What is your approach? You get to pick the right therapist. And even if you start with them and you're like, I don't like your approach, this isn't working, then you get to find somebody who does work. I know my trauma approach might not be the best for everybody. And people that come to me, I want them to have what's best for them. And so, like, we're assessing that. Like, is this working? Where are we going? Then for people say this isn't working. Okay, great. Let's find somebody whose approach will work for you. And that can be really frustrating when we start our trauma journey. I can share. I've had like probably half a dozen therapists in my lifetime, and each has been beneficial and helped me in a way. And when it wasn't working anymore, I was able to be like, okay, like, thank you so much. It's time for the next therapist that's
Mhm.
going to help me on this journey. Because as we grow, different people get to join us. And some people, I mean, I know people have had like the same therapist for 10 years. I'm like, that is so awesome. Like, I'm so happy for
Yes.
you that you've had that. For me, it's just like, well, I touched here, worked, I touched here. That's worked. Whose skills do I need in my journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And everyone, you do have, the right to seek out a counselor or therapist that works really well for you, that gives you the tools that will help you work through your trauma, whatever you are experiencing in life, whether it be not so good or better than you thought it could be. And if you are experiencing some immediate mental health issues, please know that there are supports available. You can always call 988, as well as several other options that are more immediately available. I know that Margaret has posted them previously. We'll post them again as well. But know that there is support out there. You don't have to go through this alone. You do deserve to be heard.
Yes. You deserve, like Anna was saying, to be happy, to have joy, to have this beautiful, awesome life. Everybody, maybe not even deserve. I feel that everybody, and I think Anna would agree, are entitled to joy and happiness and
Mhm.
a beautiful life. So let's start doing that hard work so we can get
Mhm.
there and be like, yay, we did it.
Yeah, let's encourage each other to get there and live it. The good life, the
Yes.
happy life. And whatever that
Yes.
looks like for you, it is your happy.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I think it's about time to close the coffin on this one. Until next time,
Yes.
drink your Bruja Brew, eat those casket cookies, and don't forget to
Like, subscribe, follow.
we'll see you next time.
Thanks.